I'd like to welcome you to this session. What we want to talk about this morning is trial master files and how they're organized and why they're so important and how we organize them. Most companies today are facing the prospect of a regulatory inspection, but even more importantly, we want to be able to manage our trials in a more efficient and organized throughout the life of the study. So the session today isn't really just about preparing for a regulatory inspection, although that's certainly our ultimate goal. For the majority of the effort here in maintaining your TMF is really about knowing what's going on with your trial, understanding where you are in your trial, and providing oversight through the life of the study. Well, what we'll talk about today is this changing regulatory climate that we're experiencing and how we apply essential documentation practices of the clinical trials in terms of the sponsor responsibilities. We'll look at the required components of your TMF, and we'll talk about some policies for how you manage your TMF. And finally, we'll talk about maintenance and quality control of the TMF. This is a really critical piece of the sponsor oversight. Many times our CROs are managing our TMFs for us, and so as a sponsor, we have a responsibility and an obligation to have oversight of this. And where we're using an eTMF system, it makes a really big difference in terms of being able to see your trial content in real time, as opposed to several years ago when we had to wait until we got the paper TMF in-house. So I really want to start with this appreciation for the fact that if it's not documented, it didn't happen. And this is really important because when it comes time for a regulatory inspection, or even when it comes time for you as a sponsor to have oversight with your CROs and your investigator sites, if you don't have documented evidence that something occurred, you really aren't able to prove that it occurred. And when you're preparing for a regulatory inspection, many times when that is happening, several members of the study team are no longer with the company. And so when someone leaves a company, the history of that study leaves with it unless we have documentation for it. And so a really well-prepared inspection will occur without the use of people. We'll be able to do it with just the documentation we had. I've just had 2 recent FDA inspections, and both of those inspectors had no interest in talking to the subject matter experts. They were simply reviewing the TMF. Same thing with EMA and MHRA inspections. They sit down and they look in your TMF. They don't take the time to interview people. They really want the documentation to speak for itself. So having a complete TMF that's easily accessible is really critical to this. So let's just start with a little bit of rationale as to why we need the TMF. As I mentioned, the TMF should really be the story of what happened with your trial. It should be really from the very beginning to selecting your vendors to the very end where you publish your clinical study report. And it should be able to stand independently and tell the story of the trial on its own. And if you think about it, the documentation that we collect as part of our TMF, or part of our trial, is really what makes up the TMF. So that means that what goes into the TMF needs to be relevant to the trial, and everything relevant to the trial needs to go into the TMF. We see the TMF referenced to in the United States Code of Federal Regulations, we see it in the EU directive, and we see it in the ICH guidelines. So just to give you a definition of the TMF, and I think the key word here is it's a standalone. It's a standalone set of documentation that doesn't really require additional explanation from an associated sponsor or site staff. And I really think that's why we're starting to see these regulatory investigators conduct these inspections without doing interviews. They don't want to talk to the people that did the work. They want the documentation to speak for itself. It also goes on to say it's the collection of documentation that allows the conduct of the clinical trial, the integrity of the trial data, and the compliance of the trial with GCP to be evaluated. That's really the purpose of a health authority inspection. They want to evaluate whether the data of the trial is real data, what is the integrity of that data. They want to make sure that the study, that this data has been collected in compliance with the protocol, with the study design as it was set forth. And then lastly, they want to make sure that it was done in compliance with GCP. And how do we do that? Well, we do that through the TMF. So basically, it tells the story of what happened during the study, and it's that output of information across all functional areas for study-related activities. Key here is it's all functional areas.